Welcome to the FMCG Guys, the podcast that dives into the innovation, strategy, and trends shaping consumer goods and retail in Europe and beyond.
Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm Daniel Torres, and I'm accompanied by the one and only Efrain Rosario. Hey, Efrain, how are you?
Good, Daniel. Good. How's your summer been?
Good, very Spanish. I went to the south of Spain, so it was an interesting experience. Not normally I go abroad or further away, so it was a very interesting experience to explore that part of the country. Bullfighting and everything, imagine.
That's very traditional or historic of you.
Spanish.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Processions, bullfighting, but it was all a lot of fun. And going out at night, obviously. Couldn't go without that.
I was expecting you were going to tell me that you took flamenco dances next.
No. I mean, you never know. It was quite amazing, though. Like, when you go out there and they play flamenco, everybody starts dancing like Sevillanas. So it's something else, and it was a cultural immersion. How about you?
For me, it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. So a little bit of time in the U.S., a bit of time in Spain as well, and then also some time, I guess, here in the continent, between France and Amsterdam, or I guess Paris and Amsterdam, let's say. So
Nice.
Yeah, a little bit of everything, but fairly good weather all around. So can't complain. And as I look out the window here, it's still sunny and blue skies. So fingers crossed, we'll see how long it lasts.
Nice. I was also able to catch up with our friend Sunny Neely here in Barcelona. So we had a nice dinner and a couple of drinks afterwards. It was a lot of fun. So,
well, I believe that's becoming like an annual rite of passage for you. It kind of symbols summer.
3 years in a row. 3 years in a row.
Yeah.
So yeah, people know that if they reach out to me in Barcelona, I normally try to make time to meet them and have some nice food and show them a bit of a good time. But another thing that we did this summer, by the way, Efrain, is we hit 25,000 LinkedIn followers, which is quite a milestone. It was one that I was very keen to get as well, I have to say.
Yes. It's obviously the number in and of itself is quite historic, but I think it's it just shows, funny to think about how this little podcast, this little science experiment has evolved from when you and I first started doing these way back in, I guess it was 2021, if I'm not mistaken, or 2022.
Yeah, we recorded the first ones in 21 and we went
we published in 2022.
Official as, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about a topic that's quite close to your heart, Efrain, that we've talked about before, which is insights. Maybe a good moment to stop for a minute and reflect on why are insights important to FMCG companies?
I mean,
we talk a lot about sales, marketing, you name it.
Yeah.
I think not so much about insights.
Well, to me, and this is something that I'm going to borrow from other people much smarter than I, insights are the lifeblood of an organization, right? And I think actually, some of our prior guests who've talked on this topic have reinforced that notion as well, is that all those other functions that you mentioned, sales, marketing, supply chain, you name it, they're all in some way, shape, or form connected back to insights in terms of whether that be consumer insight, shopper insight, commercial insights. Let's call it let's think about it from a macro trend perspective. But insight sits at the core of all of those functions in terms of being able to inform the decision making that happens. So for me, it's a little bit like creativity in some extent, in that I feel it's something that everybody in some way, somehow in their professional lives and probably even their personal lives has insight involved in what they do and how they behave. The other thing for me that I always like to remind myself is that at the end of the day, particularly from an FMCG perspective, that we're all consumers, right? In some way, shape, or form, we're all shoppers. So there's insight even in our daily lives that we can take and we can bring with us in regards to when we think about the world of insight. So for all those reasons, it's something that I've always been very passionate about, and it's something that I'm always keen to discuss.
Yeah, no, it's true that a lot of innovations normally come from trying to solve a problem, no?
No,
Or
absolutely.
need or
And
something. So that's an insight altogether.
yeah, and oftentimes it's it's when you least expect it. In terms of like an example that one of my former colleagues from Coca-Cola days always references was we were working on a project with one of our big quick serve restaurant customers, and this idea for how do we make some sort of dispensing equipment for soft drinks at the drive-through more effective came from an idea that he had from looking at a lamp at a house. So, it's not something you would normally connect the dots to in terms of thinking a lamp inside my house is going to tell me how to create something that will dispense soft drinks. But voila, there it is. So, insights, as cliche as it may sound or as Pollyanna as it may sound, insights are all around us, right? It's just a matter of like if you're willing to kind of open your eyes and open your mind to be able to accept, to take them in.
Well, you got me excited about today's conversation. Even more excited than I came into the call in. And I think with our guest today, I'll be keen to explore the key role of insights a bit more, but also like what the impact of emerging technologies like data analytics and AI are having on the function and how we interpret insights.
Well, I can't think of anybody better to talk about those things than our guest today. So I guess we should probably go ahead and reveal who that individual is, and we've kept him waiting long enough.
If people have not seen the cover or read the title, they won't know who it is. But our guest is Pavi Gupta, who's the VP Insight and Analytics at Chobani. Hey, Pavi, how are you?
Very good. Good afternoon and good morning.
Where are you connecting from, Pavi?
I'm in the Chicagoland area.
Nice.
Which is beautiful in the summers. Yeah.
That's what I've heard. Like even with my partners that we do events with, they were like, "Oh, we should do an event in Chicago in the summer because it's so amazing." So yeah. It's actually pretty amazing.
It is. I mean, when I joined here and the coldest place I'd ever lived in my life was Atlanta, and people laugh saying, but it does get cold in Atlanta. And if you come from India, Atlanta can be super cold. And then when we moved to Chicago and I joined the company, and it was during the beautiful summertime. And then when we had our first winter experience of Chicago is when I went to the talent acquisition person who hired me. And I said, now I understand why you hired me in the summers.
Yeah, probably a smart thing to do the talent acquisition following these cycles, especially if you bring in somebody that the coldest place they've lived in is Atlanta. You were referring to living in Atlanta before and then moving to Chicago. Can you tell us a bit about like your career prior to what you're doing now?
Yeah, for sure. So originally from India, born and brought up there. Fun fact, my father was in the army, so kind of we were moving houses almost every year. So I studied in 10 different schools.
Wow.
And India is a very, I know everybody says this, it's cliched, but it's genuinely true. It's a very diverse country. It's almost like a micro continent because the culture, the food, the passions, the language, sometimes even the religion, in terms of like varies dramatically. And so what that helped wire in me early in my life was this entire piece of being curious about new things and trying to relate to and understand and draw parallels of what I knew to something else that I'm now seeing, and that was kind of the initial wiring. As I started my kind of educational career and joined the workforce, I started out in insights on the agency side. It was a company called Research International, part of the Kantar organization now, and that was like the perfect schooling, grounding experience because that was back in the day, 1996. We still used to do pen and paper, right hand rule, starting point of doing sampling, knocking doors, every third door, like people can't even relate to or understand. It's like that wind down, thing that you had to wind the mirror, the glass in your car, right? Like the next generation doesn't know what that is, or the telephone when you had to kind of dial, right? So it's like that. So started there. And then I was very lucky to join one of my first clients, which was Coca-Cola, which is where I met a friend as well. We had a great time together as colleagues. And Coca-Cola took me around the journey across the world. Started out in India, headed up the function, moved to Thailand, which was a regional role. Amazing experience working in that part of the world, which was almost Thailand was, or ASEAN was the business unit, was like an amazing business unit with so much diversity from a fully developed market like a Singapore to a market which was just then opening up, which was Myanmar and Laos. So like very, very amazing to kind of have that piece. And then I moved to the head office, the mothership, Atlanta. That's what got us. That is home for us in the US, even though we don't have family there and we never went to college there. But those are the teams we support. Still kind of support because that was our first port of call. We were there for 5 years. Through my professional journey and insights, I think I got exposure to the fact, like when I started on the agency side, it was quant research, right? So it was like doing surveys, conjoints or pricing analysis or usage and attitude studies, very, very quantitatively driven. And I started kind of in Delhi. I started in Bombay and they were setting up an office in Delhi, and I moved there, and I was one of the 4 people who started that office. So we did not have the luxury of quant and qual dedicated resources. So when we got some projects in qual, I started building some chops in qual. I've done focus groups, I've transcribed them, and I started appreciating the beauty that is there in qual. When I moved to Thailand, and like even in India, we started like beyond quant and qual traditional approaches. We realized there is so much more you can learn from observations. So if you just observe what happens, and
Just to clarify, qual is like qualitative as opposed to quantitative research, right?
Yes. So it's much more, the qualitative research will be more about understanding the human psychology and literally it is like not just what is said, but also what is unsaid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the context and the psychology or the thinking behind why are people saying or behaving the way they are, right? And what are they actually holding back? What are they not telling us, which you then try to infer based on other clues that they're giving you. It could be their body language. It could be how they're interacting. It could be how they were answering before and how they're answering now after they saw the stimulus. So there's a lot of inference. And then you relate to that to the human psychology, right? So a lot of people, like the best qual researchers, typically come with a very deep anthropological, psychological understanding. Like they come from that area. And so they are able to kind of, relate and bring those concepts to the understanding of consumers, right, as human beings.
Pavi, I was going to say, sorry to interject, but you and I were talking about this a little bit in preparing, for this conversation, and kind of reminiscing a bit with regards to some of the fertile ground we had together during our time at Coke in terms of like not just some of these, we saw the evolution of some of these techniques that you're referring to in regards to like, how do you interpret more of the why in terms of like, things like we did around neuromarketing and, some of the work that we did around, even if you think about the Igniter black belt training that you and I got. I mean, I still draw on those experiences today, fast forward 15 years. But, even if you can just speak to that in terms of, how that's kind of played a role in the evolution you're describing of going from, like you said, the very quantitative, very manually driven work to like, even to that point and then beyond.
Yeah. And so, that's exactly where a friend, great reminders, right? So again, as and in the Coca-Cola company, one thing that they are really amazing at, that's kind of one of their secret superpowers, is they are very open to new things, and they're really early adopters when it comes to technology, new techniques, new thinking, new processes, and they go right in, right? And I've worked with some other companies which are very conservative and they wait for things to be successful before they get in. And no offense to those companies, that's kind of how they are built, and their DNA is like that, and there are pros and cons of different approaches. But Coke definitely always, that is the piece. And neuromarketing is something we got on very early in Coke, and Igniter as an approach, which was almost this, almost like building a new muscle of, how do you actually make sure that it's not just the insight, but it's the idea or the product or the experience that you create, which is based on that insight, which meant that you don't just admire the insight, but you actually leverage the insight to inspire or provoke more conversations and move from the what to the so what and the now what, right? So that was kind of
Yeah.
the thinking there. When I moved to J&J after Coke, and there, that was the time when the entire data piece was taking off dramatically. And J&J also, this was AccuView contact lenses. We had an app over there, and we had actually within the J&J enterprise, the biggest or the most widely used app with consumers in terms of the number of people who had downloaded and interacting on a daily basis. That gave us so much more richness of information, which traditionally you're not thinking as an insights person, right? Which is now you call it like first party data. So it's like people who are engaging with you and telling you stuff or signing up and therefore, agreeing to tell you more about themselves, right? So that you can actually now design your communication or experience for their unique situation, and it's going to resonate even better. And or like when I moved to SC Johnson after that, as this data world continued to take off, I was always very curious about the entire space on data engineering, data science, and that's when the emergence of AI started getting bigger. Especially, I think the big moment was after ChatGPT was launched, and the Gen AI revolution just took off after that. Again, that gave us access to new ways of either doing stuff or understanding people better or making our processes more efficient. And I think, Efrain, to answer your question, I think the core philosophy that I ascribe to is I call it power of and that is the piece which I believe like all of these developments or improvements or technology or process platforms that came to us help add more texture and more detail to that picture that we're trying to kind of put together of like what's happening in the consumer's mind. And depending on how important is that business decision you would take, then you would take that much more time in making sure you have all details of that picture that much more better. And that's where the power of and comes, because you can keep adding that additional texture detail, and therefore that understanding, which then makes sure that you're able to resonate and build that kind of connection at the most deep level to drive the action that you want to drive.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it really reflects on, it's not like you're necessarily like, casting away or discounting all those fundamentals that, those of us who've worked in this function, this insights function for a long time have built over the years. It's like you're saying, it's like you're adding to that and you're improving in some ways the effectiveness and the efficiency of like how you're doing that in terms of like being able to manage more copious amounts of data or being able to get to like more layers in terms of really understanding the consumer. So I love that, because I do feel like sometimes those fundamentals are, let's not say not disregarded, but I think maybe not accentuated enough. One thing that I wanted to ask you about, and to me this is really fascinating in terms of like as you described your move in from a, let's call it a more purely insights type role at Coca-Cola and at J&J into moving into really more of an analytical leadership role at CJ. I'm curious to get your perspective in regards to what that did for you in terms of like building new skills and in some cases maybe stretching you into new areas that you hadn't been able to explore earlier in your career.
Yeah. And there was actually a moment which made me pause and almost actually I talk about it as it was a grief cycle and went through to really understand and appreciate that there is more to it, right, than just kind of the traditional ways of doing things. I had a leader at Johnson and Johnson, and when he joined new, I had some time to take him through some of the work we had been doing. We call it our knowledge estate. And I spent an hour with him taking through all the beautiful work that we had done. And, it was like I had a lot of pride in that work because, we had kind of looked at it very holistically. We called it also kind of our learning journey and learning plan, where we said, what are the areas or gaps that we have on understanding the category and the consumers and the ECPs, because contact lenses is a very unique category where consumers don't decide whether they need vision correction or not. That is a card that they've been dealt with life, right? But they definitely decide what they're going to do to address that need, right? So whether you wear glasses like you're doing Efren, I do most of the days, or today I'm wearing my contact lenses, or maybe someone goes and gets a LASIK surgery done, or maybe somebody doesn't do anything, right? So that means that we need to understand both consumers and ECPs. And so as I took him through that entire journey, I was hoping he's going to be, very impressed and there'll be more questions. And I said, like, how was that? And he said, yeah, it was okay. And I was like, wait a second, like, did you just say it was okay? Like, what's going on here? And that's when the grief cycle went. And it started from like anger to irritation and denial, or like, maybe he doesn't like me, or maybe, he wasn't paying attention, or, whatever, right? And maybe he doesn't understand insights and he's not curious or whatever, right? And then to like some grudging exam, wait a second, like, what are you saying? You didn't say it was useless. You said it's okay. So tell me more. Why was it okay? And why wasn't it better? And then he started opening up and he said, this is like, by the way, the work you've done is amazing. The insights are outstanding, but you've done it very old school. You're still doing surveys, you're still doing focus groups, you're still doing maybe some, other new biometric approaches. But what you're not doing is you're not tapping into what he calls as the digital exhaust that consumers are leaving behind. And by the way, people, that was kind of at the peak of its time. People were sharing, blogging, posting without putting too many filters on their privacy, settings. And there was so much content that was available without even asking. And that's when that dawned on me, is like, wow, why not? Why not? Why not also tap into this signal? And yes, that might have, like, there might not be everything there, but there might be a lot of things that we actually don't get access to. And then I said, I need to upskill myself in this world, and I went and did a course at Columbia. I did another course at, MIT. And like, these were courses I was doing just to start appreciating. I mean, eventually, when I was at SC Johnson, I was very, generous and gracious of them to sponsor me for a Kellogg's CDO course for a year. That was a full year course into, AI and advanced analytics. And what that did was, I learned how to code, but I'm not a coder. Thankfully, now ChatGPT is also disrupting that. So luckily, I didn't learn to code. But the idea to learn to do what Python, how coding in Python is, to understand what is the power of this tool, and therefore how it can be applied for what I'm doing, and or at least have more intelligent conversations with people in my teams who are actually leveraging those tools, and then bring different analogs and parallels together to say, how can you use one thing for another?
Yeah. So I love that you're mentioning that. I actually have a really good friend who is more on the tech side of corporate life, and he's been on me for years in terms of, like, why haven't you learned how to code Python? Like, you should be learning how to code Python. And I think the epiphany was really when I was talking to my teenage daughter, and she's having now to code in Python just to be able to take a math class in high school. So I was like, okay, this is starting to become almost like table stakes. And just to build on that in terms of a question, so, you've kind of gone through that journey in terms, like you said, you were, afforded the opportunity, or in some ways the luxury for some people in terms of being able to, participate in some of these formal education programs. We don't go more than one episode, much more, we usually at least a few times in these episodes where we talk about AI. I'm curious as to what, having gone through that experience, what your guidance is in terms of, the role of AI, because obviously it's the buzzword or the thing that we're all talking about. But what do you see in terms of like the role it's playing in terms of like the evolution of the insights function? Right? In terms of like, what would be your guidance to other individuals who are kind of in essence thinking about what should I do in terms of building my skill set in this area?
Yeah. That's really, really solid question, Efrain. Something, that everybody needs to encounter. And again, hopefully don't need to go through a grief cycle with that, right? Don't resist this piece because this is here. It's here to stay. And I think the basic piece that I've learned through my times and, kind of continuing to learn is how do you embrace it? And how do you understand what is the best way in which, it can actually help augment you and it can help you become a better version of yourself, right? So long back, people used to just write. There were no typewriters or there was no printing press. And, when there was printing press and there were no word processors, you would just type it once and that's it. Or you need to kind of use the white ink, and then there were word processors and you changed it. Now you can, get into one of these LLMs and actually just write a thought and then that can create it into a full paragraph or a sentence or maybe even a book one day, right? Or maybe it can already do that as well. I do know that it can create amazing poems as well, which I was like, I can write poem for nuts. And one of my best viral posts that I posted was actually a poem which I wrote along with Copilot. So I think the beauty in this entire space is, first is I want to say, it's not as if AI is new, right? It's not new. Now, of course, the entire Gen AI space or that entire conversational LLM part of it, that is new. But the philosophy of AI has been around for, again, we can go back and read, but for decades, for more than 5-6 decades, it's been there. So there's been a lot of that discipline which has been there. And the insights function or teams and analytics teams have been leveraging the superpower of that what comes from the advanced analytics used to started with called big data and then maybe data science and all of that. They've been leveraging that for a long time. I think what the LLMs and Gen AI and now the agentic systems are doing, that they're just making the interfaces much more easier. It's more conversational. It's easier to draw into what you're needing the models to do. And then of course there is also this piece around the language part of it in terms of how the word, so it's not just the mathematical calculations or models or the regression equations that you're building, but it's also the language part of it. So those pieces are unique. And then of course now it's also the visual, whether it's image or video, and all of that is kind of taking off. So it is a moment and it's very different, but it's been around. And just like the insights teams or people have embraced each of those waves of changes that have come through, this is actually a tsunami. It's a tidal wave. It's not just a regular normal wave that we need to make sure that we embrace and ride, and then try to see, how does it actually synergize with where, what our stakeholders, our business needs are, so that then we can deliver the best. One more thing on this I would say is, the technology people, the AI people, the people who are building these LLMs and are the most genius brains in the world today are amazing at building those solutions, but they are not the domain experts of every domain that exists in the world, right? And so if we look at just the insights domain, how do we leverage that power that is being unleashed and then bring your own domain expertise and now make this into something amazing? Because they may or may not necessarily have thought about your domain to optimize for your domain, right? And definitely not for the insights domain with I don't think anybody's doing it intentionally, but that's not where they started, right? So that gives you an amazing space to show and shine and say your domain expertise is still needed. It's not unneeded. It's needed even more because you really know what needs to get done. How do you unleash that even more, power it even more with these new tools that you now have access to?
Hey, Pavi, is there any examples of a very tangible application of AI on insights that you've experimented yourself?
So I would still say work in progress, experimenting rather than experimented. And I like to think about it as, where. So the first thing I like to do with AI is to make sure it's not what I will call as FOMO driven AI. Okay. Fear of missing out. Oh, somebody else is doing this. Oh, this looks cool. Let me also do that. That I think is a trap and a rabbit hole we should not fall into. You do need to hack it because it's very easy to fall into that. And the reason I say that is because it's always about what is the business need. And so as I think about the business need, and then I see the landscape of where am I spending my time and my effort and my energy, and now I'm thinking about how can AI help solve that rather than, oh, here is an amazing tool and application of AI and how do I use it to actually almost create a problem that I probably or had or did not have, right? So that's kind of the difference. And to answer your question, Daniel, what I've been focusing on more and more is how can insights play a role in what I will loosely call as validation space. And if you think about a 2x2, it goes from the known to the unknown and the intuitive to the counterintuitive. The validation space is the bottom left quadrant, right? And that space takes a lot of our time, effort, energy, resources because businesses need those answers to take certain decisions, sometimes to justify decisions, sometimes to make sure that like reinforce to themselves it's the right decisions, sometimes to quantify the pace of change in what's happening in the thing that we already know and is intuitive, right? And that is the space where I feel AI will play the biggest role for us. And that's what I've been working on is like, can we build some, let's say an agent which can just interrogate the data that I already have and ingest that so that I can query this agent and actually have a digital full-time person, that agent, and smarter, with no offense to all us humans, smarter because it never forgets, right? And
Yeah.
accurate because it's got that information in. And then what it does is it frees us to do our piece. Our piece is curiosity and empathy. And then we can unleash that on top of like that validation that we already have to get to the
Yeah.
unknown and get to the counterintuitive.
Yeah, I always remember something, and there were several leaders back at our days in Coca-Cola, Pavi, that used to talk about this, which is that there's creativity within a framework in terms of like sometimes we like to think that technology or process can inhibit creativity, but I think what you've articulated is exactly the opposite, which is what some of these business leaders that you and I had the good fortune to work with talked about, which is that no, it's actually quite the opposite, which is that because it can take some of let's call it the manual grunt work off your plate in terms of the example you mentioned, which is having to sift through hundreds of PowerPoint slides or copious analyst reports. If you can use a tool like AI to help you do that, then that frees you up to really kind of do more of the interpretation and add the empathy in regards to what's the what and then what's the so what behind this, right? In terms of what should I go do about it, right? Because that is one thing that, at least in my experience, in terms of when we use AI and some of the ways that you've talked about from a use case perspective, it's still not quite there. It can't. It can certainly, like you said, be able to process all those reports and all those data points, but it can't get you to the so what quite yet. And I think that's something that a lot of people are encountering for sure. I was going to ask you, in terms of, we've talked about a little bit in terms of how we're using AI and LLMs in terms of being able to help us in terms of becoming more, let's call it efficient. But I think just as important as that, and I know you mentioned, not wanting to fall into that FOMO trap, but how do you see that in terms of for example, the mindset of the insights teams in terms of how do you start shifting that mindset to not be threatened with things like AI, but you really see it, like you said, more as an augmentation and not necessarily a replacement of my role.
Yeah. And I think this is the biggest opportunity and or the challenge for anybody who's operating in this space is, how do you take the teams along? How do you take your teams along? How do you take your vendor ecosystem teams along? How do you take your stakeholders along? Because it is very human and natural to feel, if there's something that you're doing today, if somebody was like an analyst who was doing that interrogation and their superpower was they were amazing at pulling all the cuts of the slices of the data or, getting that, and now that is being automated, it is natural for them to feel that, okay, what am I going to do? And my job's going away. And that is where, what we need to do is try to figure out how do we reason with them and help them understand the fact that that grunt work is going away is actually, is something that is going to enrich them and make their lives even better, because we still need the human, in the loop. We still need the human curiosity and the human empathy, and we still need the humans to, like, who's going to ask the questions, you know? So even if I said, like, interrogate the data, who's asking the questions? It does. How smart can the question be? That's where now this entire area of prompt engineering coming through, right? How can you articulate what the question is? And the best business, solutions come when the question or what you're trying to do is actually very, very clear. And that's when, that's like, I think this was Einstein. I think I don't want to misattribute, but he said, like, if I had a problem and I had an hour, I would spend 59 minutes on defining what the problem is, and 1 minute, and I might have got this a little wrong, right? So I'll paraphrase, but the idea was, spend more time on fleshing out what the problem is, and that is what we are good at, right? And then leverage these tools to unleash that. But that change management, right? That, because there is internal resistance to this change, and it's not just passive, there's also active resistance to the change. So how do you manage that? In the insights world, there is a phrase called synthetic data. It's a lightning rod. You throw it in and, it shuts down all conversations, because you get, like, it's like my LinkedIn feeds have two streams of thinking. One saying this is the best thing ever to happen, and the other saying this is the worst thing ever to happen, right? So it's very polarizing, some of these solutions and tools and all of that coming in. So how do we actively encourage people to have the conversations, to listen to or understand what these tools and techniques can do, and see what you're going to use and leverage, right? So it's not as if, like, I'm not in the camp of, like, either of those two camps, because I know there is some value to it, but I also know that if left to itself, there is danger to it. So how do you kind of, find the balance in terms of leveraging the value while minimizing the danger?
And to your point, it is Einstein, and it says, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining
55.
the proper question to ask.
Yes.
So there you go. I think that's a fascinating debate, like, about AI. Clearly we have to implement it, but I think where's the limit of use so it doesn't make us stupid, right? So you can't also, is it really, like, balance that you're finding on how to, like, balance it without necessarily leaving your brain at the table, outsourcing your brain to a ChatGPT?
Yeah. And I feel like this is where the human superpower comes, the curiosity superpower, right, that we have, and the empathy superpower. And that's why it will always be needed and always be there. So the superpower of curiosity is critical. And by the way, you got to hack it, because evolutionary biology, and Efren, you would remember from our neuroscience days, Dr. A.K. Pradeep would keep talking about the human brain uses 95% of your energy, or whatever, 80% of your energy. So the evolutionary brain is almost wired to stifle that curiosity, because you don't want to be using that energy all the time, right? You didn't even know when your next meal is going to come. So, and that's happened through so many years, of life. So you need to hack it, and you need to be more curious. You need to actually, like, ask the question to yourself, saying, why am I not being more curious? Because, by the way, the most curious people in the world are children, and all of us were children. So we were, at some point of time, the most curious people in the world. It's just that either the world or the hacking, like, part of it, like the evolutionary part of it, has just stifled that curiosity or eroded that. How do we refresh it and ask the questions? And in these days of Gen AI and agentic systems, even more important.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think that, just in my own personal experimentation with some of the ChatGPT type tools, I do find that in some ways, and people I think have talked about this. There have been articles written about it, which is like where it starts to, like, it's the same as having a conversation with someone, in terms of, like, you're able to kind of ask it questions that perhaps you don't feel comfortable asking a human being, right? But that like I talk to friends who say, yeah, I've got like, conversations I've been having with whatever my my GPT engine of choice or platform of choice around like, what medical treatments I should be pursuing at my age, or like, how I should be thinking about parenting. I mean, like there's all sorts of things that people are like really, really exploring. And obviously you can apply that from a professional perspective as well. I mean, I would say 2 years ago, I think a lot of people were talking about, we all need to become better prompt engineers in regards to the prompts that we're learning to write in terms of being able to engage with the different platforms. I think, agentic AI is taking that to a different realm altogether. But I think, like you said, at the end of the day, if you boil it down to the fundamental element, it's this curiosity that we all need to think about how we kind of reignite in ourselves. And which I personally love, as a learning from this. Pavi, I want to take us to, thinking about obviously new technologies and things like obviously like AI and LLMs and all these types of things. I mean, I want to, like you said, this is not something that's new. And, one thing about the insights function that I think is really interesting is that it's really good in terms of embracing change, in terms of like new techniques, new tools, et cetera, over the, the entire the time of the profession. Can you share with us an example of another technology that was ahead of its time and like, how you kind of dealt with it in terms of like, learning from that experience and
Yeah,
taking,
awesome.
the good from that as opposed to just thinking about it as in the bad?
Yeah. So I listened to a podcast sometime recently where it talked about like, did you know, like that was literally the headline of the podcast is, did you know that the largest selling car in the 1890s was an electric car? And I was like, oh, that like, I would have never imagined that. Like, what's
In the
going
early
on here, right?
90s.
In the 1890s.
1890s.
1990s. Okay.
Right. And so as I listened to that, and that was true because, the earlier cars used to be mechanical. You'd had to crank, they were very masculine focused because you needed like strength and then they were dirty in terms of like, not very noisy. There was a lot of like, all of that. And so someone built an electric car in the 1890s and it was the top selling car, but it didn't have batteries, so it was connected, so it had its limitations, and it actually expanded the audience to women and so on and so forth, and gave them more independence, freedom to move around. And I think the main thing they were talking about there was like the idea was great, right? But the full, like the ecosystem was not fully ready for it, or it was an idea ahead of its time, right? And then more evolution needed to happen in terms of battery and all of that, like address some of those issues for it to really take off before like, Tesla came and Elon Musk like really took it to a completely different level, right? So on the insights world, I've gone through this multiple times. I can think of an example when I was at J&J and we were doing a lot of like, a lot of social listening, unstructured data, beating data to shape. And, one of the ideas we had that time was like, how do we mine and contrast information? Can I mine data from, like consumer signals, posts, blogs, tweets, so on and so forth, that people are freely sharing about what's going on in their vision correction needs or journey and space? And can I contrast that to, what's happening in the scientific space in terms of patents, in terms of new technologies, new papers, people are publishing those. And the idea was very good because it's like, okay, there is, maybe there's development in the technology. Like if you do this 2x2 of like what's development happening in technology space and what's our consumers asking for. And then the sweet spot will be where this is a big need and actually there's a lot of work going on. But the beautiful opportunity area will be there is a big need for consumers, but there's not enough work going on, right? And so there's like, okay, you need to start going there. And so and we could do it because we had this we had access to this startup company which had like very good algorithms to kind of start looking at it. But when we did that work, we realized like the framework sounded good, but the data wasn't behaving. And the data was not behaving because, like like in the vision correction space, like when solutions are working, the unlike a lot of other products where you would want to almost have that as a badge of I'm wearing this product or I'm driving this car or I'm consuming this product. In the vision care space, it's the absence of the product, right? That means it's working. So if my contact lenses are working very well, I'm not going to be talking about it because they're working because I wanted to be free from the glasses. So the data ecosystem was just not ripe to actually give us those insights of when it's working and not working was there, but the working wasn't there. So what we figured was that was a gap. Second was we didn't have the tools that you can have today to mine that data more for the scientific community, because if we just give them processed information, it's not good enough. So when we took the R&D team through it, everybody liked it, but they said, like, give me access to the platform. Can I do? And so that wasn't set up. Today, if they went and ran that project again with everything you have with like these more conversational interfaces, I think that piece will be solved as well. So again, there are times when you do work and the work or the idea is good, but the solution doesn't come through all the way because there's some pieces which are missing in how that product can be used.
Yeah. I'm interested to know, because we were talking before about the insights function, about like how key it is, and I think that in this conversation it's even more clear. How do you think that strategic importance of insights can be elevated in the internally, but also in the public eye? Like, how can we raise the profile of the insights community, insights functions, insights leaders, call it as you will? But I don't think there's many CEOs. Look, a lot of CEOs, the common thread is that they've done a lot of multifunctional moves, but I can't think of many that have done a proper insights role.
Yeah. And this is fascinating because when I joined Insights back in the day, I'll date myself here in 1996, it wasn't an area that was like drawing too many people into it, right? That was a problem because it was seen to be a more, this is like set behind the desk and analytical and more mathematical. And, it wasn't the most fancy area to get in. But if you look at AI today and what AI has done, the number of people who are reaching out to me who want to like understand more and get into it, or people who want to do like a cross-functional assignment into it, it's off the charts. I've never seen that in close to 3 decades in my life, right? How do we elevate the function? I think, Daniel, it's a cause that I deeply believe in, and it's something that has deep resonance in my head as well, because a lot of the intellectual capital that is created in organizations comes either it's immediately or eventually, it comes from the insights team. Either it's a seed that is, grown by someone else, or it's a full tree or the fruit given by the insights team, right? But I don't think the full attribution of the efforts that have gone behind it, either to the people or the efforts or even the ecosystem goes. And it's fascinating because you asked this question. I'm actually now associating with this effort led by Dr. Lubov. She works with Diageo and based out of Europe. So, Afrin, I don't know if you know her. We've not exchanged notes. And she has started what is called as the Insights Lighthouse. And I think like it's an incredible effort, right? Because what she's doing, and she's doing this not for profit, she's doing it on the side job as, because again, I think this is a purpose she's behind. How do we elevate it, right? And what she did was she said, let's create a new platform and forum where we can bring, the insights leaders to interface with the business leaders and at a different level. And the forum is done in a manner where people are having those conversations. It's more about, you have, okay, this is a reflection moment. We are in to like reflect and understand. So she did that along on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum at Davos. And she did that a few times, and she's done that at Cannes a couple of times now. And she's looking to expand this here in the US to do this on the sidelines of the CES, actually, as part of that official piece. And I was like, the moment I heard of it, it's like, how can I help? I want to join. I want to help you. Like, this is a purpose. And, how do you make sure it's one effort, right? I don't think that is the silver bullet. Again, power of and we need to like work on it at multiple levels. But those kind of efforts need to happen where we intentionally look for those reflective times and moments. Even more important in today's day and age, because you're not even Googling, you're looking for ChatGPT to give you the full solution, right? So now there is even less patience to reflect. You want everything even more ready now, but hey, the best ideas you need to reflect, and the best problems you need to reflect on as well, right? Going back to that, the Einstein quote. So I think it will be a win-win. It's a win for the industry. It's win for, whichever company or, marketer who's looking at it. And it's a win for the function. And the net output, collective output will be better. But that's not the only effort. There needs to be more effort. So I welcome the question you posed, Daniel, and maybe like back to you is like, how can you, the CPG guys, the FMCG guys, how can you help us also to continue to drive this, realization of how important it is to kind of drive, this reflection and curiosity piece together.
Yeah, no, this is an open forum. I think we should look at some type of partnership and have like periodically different leaders around the Insight Lighthouse. I mean, I can also tell you, like, goodness, that's a great effort as well. That the first two big events that you have a presence in, Davos and Cannes, and the third CES. I mean, doesn't get much better than that. These are very high-profile events.
Yeah. And just so to do a quick plug, Joanna Dumont, previous guest on our program, is also part of the Insights Lighthouse as well.
And Joris as well.
Yes.
Yeah, Joanna came with Joris, who's also super active in the community. So we've had them on, but I think we should do more. So Pavi, this wouldn't be FMCG Guys episode without our famous last question, which is the following. If you had to go back to your younger self, starting your career, what would be that one piece of advice you would give yourself?
Yeah, the one piece of advice I would tell the younger me is, try to strive for the balance. Don't, like whether it is, okay, I want to do a lot and I want to get promoted and I want the next job and the more responsibility. And what happens is you go after, that North Star that you set for yourself. And through that journey, at least that happened with me, it was about, I will actually, take reflection or enjoy it when I reach the destination. And you actually don't enjoy the journey, right? Because you just want the journey to be done and you want to get to the end. What you realize is, 29 years later, is like the journey is still on. Like, I'm not going to shut down this, I don't think I'm at the end of that journey. So now I want to now I'm enjoying the journey as well. And of course, I still have the destination. So imagine if people can do that earlier in their lives and start finding a little bit more balance by enjoying the journey more, that's actually going to make life more fun for them, and it'll get a better side of what they can contribute and bring to the organization as well.
Fantastic. So, Ephraim, shall we quickly go through the takeaways of the conversation? I can hear you clicking away, so I know you're preparing them.
I am. I apologize for the background noise, but there's a lot of nuggets in
like
there.
When they write on their computer like super loud. I remember my dad was like a typewriter, like writing like on a typewriter.
It probably reflects a little bit of either your enthusiasm or your emotion at the time. There's probably some scientific.
My dad is age.
Yeah. So there's probably a lot of interesting analyses we could do in regards to like the correlation between like the noise of your keyboards to like any of those things. So maybe something for Pavi and I to take offline as a little side project to do. We'll see. But no, I think in all seriousness, no, thank you, Pavi. I mean, I've been jotting down notes and typing copiously in regards to what you said, and in some ways, it's been wonderful to kind of take a walk down memory lane with you in terms of some of our shared experiences from the Coca-Cola days, but at the same time, it's been absolutely fascinating to hear you kind of taken, some of those shared experiences and just expanded to the, beyond those in terms of some of the work you've done at the companies you've been to afterwards. For me though, one of the big takeaways that I had was, something you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation around the power of and, which is something that I can trace back to some of those shared experiences in terms of like the Igniter training we had with What If, in terms of like, how you use that in terms of being able to facilitate ideation and creativity with individuals. But to me, I think it's fascinating to hear how you've taken that concept and really used it almost as a guiding principle in terms of like, learning some of these new skills and like, pursuing education, for executive education at Kellogg and some of these other places in terms of like data science and, learning how to code in Python. I mean, to me, that's, it's really inspirational. And I'm saying that sincerely. I mean, to me, you've inspired me to think about maybe finally signing up for that Python course.
It's much easier now, friend. It's much easier now. Now you got vibe coding, right? So you can do vibe coding. Yeah.
Well, and I've got a tutor at home in my teenage daughter. Although I don't know how patient she will be with me.
If you type like this, she won't be patient at all. That's right. I think it's interesting that you said that the AI is a tidal wave, and you need to embrace it. And it's like, how do you embrace it, and what's the best way to understand how to augment yourself? No, I think like how to delegate some more mundane, automated parts. I think it's interesting as well now that we get all this data for insights, especially on the quant side. How do you work better around these data points? No, let's leverage the fact, and I think that there's a lot of potential there.
And I would take that also in terms of something that we might talked about at the end of our conversation just now, which is, how we talked about how we elevate the insights function, and the phrase that I wrote down is like, how do we ride the positive momentum of this AI wave in terms of like, like you said, Pavi, it's the conversations of people reaching out to you as a leader in this space, and really think about, not just in terms of like recruiting new people into the function, but it's also kind of taking people who maybe haven't worked in insights and, and they've got years of experience, but, thinking about how do you use this as a spark for that curiosity that you mentioned as well.
Yeah, I think that it's that mix between like understanding AI, how can we leverage, but also like really remembering to really work on our curiosity, our critical thinking, and as you said, Pavi, asking the question, right? Like finding the right question to ask and dedicating your time to that. So, and that was very interesting. Also, that in the 1890s, the most highest selling cars were electric. That was very interesting as well.
Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think the last takeaway that I want to mention that I had was around, how we can learn from some of the experiences you shared in regards to avoiding that grief cycle, and being able to be proactive in terms of, and I can't remember exactly that. I couldn't write it down fast enough, but the phrase that you used from the gentleman at J&J who talked about the, how he said like why it was just okay, which is the exhaust, or what did he call it again?
Exhaust. Yeah,
the digital exhaust. How do we avoid the grief cycle and catch on to the digital exhaust faster, being proactive in that. That to me was a really good learning as well.
Totally. Well, thanks, Pavi, again for joining us. We are looking forward to having more insights people on the podcast, have conversations like that. Thanks, Efrain, as well, and thanks to our audience for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG guys. Have a great day.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from Dwyer Partners SL, doing business as the FMCG guys, or the individual author, host, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Dwyer Partners SL. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Dwyer Partners SL expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we presented in this podcast.